They told parents this was the safe choice. That's the part that makes this story hit so hard. Because when people buy baby formula, they are not shopping for convenience. They are trusting a system. They are trusting the label. They are trusting the company. They are trusting that what they are feeding a newborn has been made with honesty, care, and no tricks. But in this case, the trust was shaken. For years, families had very little reason to question what was inside the can. The packaging looked clean. The branding looked reassuring. The message was simple. This product was designed to help babies grow, and for millions of parents, especially those who could not breastfeed or needed a backup, that message mattered more than almost anything else. Then came the questions. What exactly was in the formula? Were the ingredients always what the label suggested? And more importantly, did the company tell the full truth? That's where this story stops being about baby formula and starts becoming something much bigger. Because once a company sells a product that parents use on their most vulnerable children, even the smallest lie becomes a big deal. And if you think that sounds dramatic, just wait. Because the deeper this story goes, the more it looks like this was never just about nutrition. It was about money, control, and how far a company can push before people finally notice. The story really begins when people started looking closer at what these products were actually made of. Because baby formula is not just one thing. It has proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and sometimes ingredients that sound harmless on paper, but become a lot more complicated when you look at how they are sourced, tested, and labeled. And that is where trust starts to crack. In cases like this, the problem usually is not that the product looked dangerous on the outside. The problem is that people assumed the company would be honest on the inside. They assumed the ingredient list meant exactly what it said. They assumed that if something important was in the formula, it would be clearly disclosed. But history has shown that companies do not always behave that way. When money is on the line, labels can become marketing tools. Words can be chosen carefully. Risks can be softened. Unpleasant details can be buried in technical language. And for most people, especially busy parents, that is enough to keep the questions away. That is what makes this kind of story so disturbing. It does not rely on some obvious scandal where everyone can see the problem right away. It relies on ordinary trust. The kind of trust that happens in kitchens at a.m. when a parent is tired, worried, and just trying to do the right thing for their baby. And once the trust is broken, it is hard to build back. Because now the question is not just whether the formula worked. The question is whether the company ever deserved the trust in the first place. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how powerful baby formula is in the first place. For a lot of families, formula is not a backup plan. It is the plan. It feeds babies when breastfeeding is not possible, not enough, or not the right fit for the family. So when a company puts a formula on the shelf, it is not just selling a product. It is stepping into one of the most sensitive decisions a parent can make. That is why ingredient claims matter so much. If a company suggests that a formula is cleaner, safer, gentler, or more complete than it really is, that is not a small exaggeration. That is a promise made to people who do not have room for mistakes. Parents are not making a casual purchase. They are trying to protect a child who cannot protect himself. And that is where the emotional weight of this story really starts to build. Because the more you think about it, the worse it feels. A regular consumer can return a bad gadget, throw away a disappointing snack, or switch brands after a bad experience. But when it comes to baby formula, there is no harmless trial run. There is only trust. And if that trust is broken, the consequences feel personal. This is also why these stories stay with people for so long. They are not just about a company cutting corners. They are about the gap between what parents believed and what was actually true. And once that gap opens, everything starts to look different. And this is where the story gets darker. Because once a product becomes part of everyday life, people stop asking hard questions. They assume someone else already checked. They assume the system works. They assume that if something was wrong, it would have been caught long before it ever reached store shelves. That is the danger. A company does not need to lie in some huge obvious way to damage trust. Sometimes all it takes is leaving out one important detail. Sometimes it is the wording on the package. Sometimes it is what is emphasized in ads and what is left out in fine print. And sometimes the truth is technically somewhere in the paperwork, but not in a way that regular people would ever notice. That is what makes these cases so frustrating, because when the story finally comes out, the company can say, "We followed the rules." They can hide behind process. They can point to the label. They can argue that no one was forced to buy it. But that does not erase the feeling people get when they realize they were never told the full story. And for parents, that feeling cuts deeper than most companies understand. You do not forget the moment you realize the thing you trusted most may not have been as honest as you thought. You remember the late nights. You remember the money spent. You remember believing the label. And that is exactly why stories like this spread so fast. They are not just about one product. They are about a basic question every consumer eventually has to ask. If they could hide this, what else have they hidden? What makes this story work is that it does not need hype. It does not need wild music or exaggerated claims. The truth is already strong enough. A product made for babies, a company people trusted, a label people believed, and the possibility that the real story was not as clean as it looked. That alone is enough to make people stop scrolling, because deep down, everyone understands the pattern. A brand becomes familiar. A family relies on it. The years go by. The product becomes part of normal life. And then, one day, something breaks that image. A report comes out. A document surfaces. A lawsuit starts asking questions people should have been asking years earlier. And suddenly, a product that once felt safe starts to feel different. That is the power of these stories. They turn ordinary objects into evidence. They make people look at store shelves and wonder what else has been packaged as harmless, when it was never that simple. And that is where we are headed next. Because once you understand how much trust was involved, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly did the company know? And when did it know it? Now, we get to the part where it all started to unravel. This is not some made-up drama. This is about a real company, Abbott Nutrition, and their popular formula called Similac. Back in 2022, parents started noticing something was wrong. Babies were getting sick. Some were hospitalized. A few did not make it. And the common thread, they had been fed this formula from a plant in Michigan that had serious problems. Whistleblowers came forward first. They said the factory was filthy. Bacterial contamination was not being handled right. Maintenance was ignored. And the company knew about it, but kept shipping product anyway. Parents trusted the label that said it was safe and sterile. But inside those cans, there were risks they were never warned about. The FDA got involved. They found bacteria like Cronobacter in the plant, a germ that can be deadly for infants. Abbott recalled millions of cans. Stores emptied shelves. Families panicked because there was not enough formula left for anyone. It was chaos. And through it all, Abbott said they followed safety rules. But documents later showed they had reports of problems for years. They had inspection failures. They had complaints. Yet the product kept going out the door. That is when parents started asking if they knew about these issues. Why did the label never say anything? Why did the marketing still call it the safe choice? Let me tell you about one family that got hit hard by this. Her name was Sara, and she lived in Michigan. She had a newborn named Tommy who was born premature. Sara could not breastfeed, so she turned to Similac like so many other parents. The label said it was safe. The doctors recommended it. She mixed the formula to M, fed her baby, and watched him sleep peacefully. That is all she wanted, for him to be okay. But Tommy started getting sick. He had a fever that would not go down. He stopped eating. Doctors ran tests and found Cronobacter, the same bacteria the FDA found in Abbott's plant. Tommy spent weeks in the hospital fighting for his life. Sara later learned her formula came from that Michigan factory. She felt sick to her stomach, not because she did anything wrong, but because she trusted a company that shipped risky product anyway. Stories like Sara's were not alone. The FDA linked 4 infant deaths to the contaminated formula. Lawsuits piled up. Parents sued Abbott, saying the company knew about sanitation issues for months, maybe years, but kept selling the product. Court documents showed internal emails where workers warned about dirty equipment and poor cleaning, yet production lines kept running. Sara went public. She held up the empty Similac can on TV and asked, "How could you let this happen?" That question echoed for every parent who ever read that label and believed it. Abbott's response made things even worse for a lot of people. The company came out saying they cared about safety. They said the factory met standards. They even blamed parents for not mixing the formula right or storing it properly. But that did not sit well with families who followed every rule. Sara and others said, "We did everything you told us. We read the label. We trusted your brand." Then the lawsuits dug deeper. In 2023, more documents came out showing Abbott had FDA warnings about the Michigan plant going back to 2019. They had issues with sanitation, equipment breakdowns, and even dead insects found in areas where formula was made. Workers said they raised flags, but management pushed to keep production going to meet demand. The recalls kept happening. First, it was powdered formula. Then they pulled more products. Parents across the country scrambled to find any formula at all. Some drove hours to other states. Others watered down what they had or turned to risky online sellers. The shortage lasted months and hit low-income families the hardest. By mid-2023, Abbott settled some lawsuits quietly. They paid families without admitting fault, but the damage was done. Trust in big formula brands took a huge hit. People started reading labels like never before, wondering what else might be hidden behind the safe for babies promise. And Sara, she switched brands but still checks every can twice. She says she'll never feel that blind trust again. This story did not end with just one factory or one recall. The fallout from Abbott's issues rippled across the entire baby formula world. Other companies started getting extra scrutiny. Parents everywhere began questioning not just Similac, but every brand on the shelf. Was the label really telling the full story? Was safety claims backed by real checks, or just marketing words? Regulators stepped up too. The FDA promised tougher inspections and better tracking of formula plants. They created new rules for reporting problems faster, but critics said it was too little too late. Families argued that the system relied too much on companies to self-report issues, and when profits are huge, the formula market is worth billions. Companies have every reason to downplay risks. What hurt most was how this exposed bigger cracks. Baby formula is not optional for many families. When supply chains fail or trust breaks, there is no quick fix. Hospitals rationed formula. Some parents made emergency trips across state lines. Low-income MOMs faced the worst of it, with no access to fresh stock. Today, the Similac crisis is a turning point. It made people realize that even trusted products for babies carry hidden vulnerabilities. Sara and thousands like her now advocate for more transparency. They push for clearer labels, independent testing, and real penalties when companies cut corners. But the core question lingers. How do you rebuild trust when the label feels like part of the problem? So here we are at the end of this story. But it does not really feel like an ending, because stories like the Similac crisis do not wrap up neatly. They leave you with questions that stick around. Questions like, why did it take whistleblowers and sick babies for anyone to act? Why were those factory problems ignored for years? And what happens the next time a big company decides that shipping product matters more than perfect safety? This is not about pointing fingers at one brand and calling it done. It is bigger than that. Baby formula touches millions of lives every year. It is there in the quiet moments of new parenthood, the feedings, the worries, the hope that you are doing it right. When a company breaks the trust, it shakes something fundamental. Sara's story, and stories like hers, remind us to look closer, read the fine print, ask questions, because the label might say safe, but safe for who? And proven how. Trust is earned over time, but it can break in a moment, especially when lives depend on it. Next time you see a can of formula on the shelf, or hear a parent talking about feeding choices, think about this. The system is better now because people spoke up. But it is still on us to stay awake. Companies make billions. Parents just want healthy kids. That is the real paper trail here, not hidden anymore. Thanks for sticking with this story. If it made you think twice about what we trust every day, that is the point. Hit like if this hit home. Subscribe for more stories that big companies hoped you'd never hear. And drop a comment. What product label makes you question things now?